Manuel, we have a lot of ground to cover. I'm really happy to have you on today. Maybe as a first question to start, and we are talking about your career in early stage. What has changed the most in early stage technology companies since obviously you've been working in the field?
Well, first of all, Nectar, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a very important listener of your podcast, and so it feels great to be on this side of the table. To answer your question, lots have changed. And I'm gonna do a two-step answer on that. So I've been born and raised in France. I've started my company in France, so I was an entrepreneur in France, and I arrived in Canada in 2016, and this was really the beginning of the early stage. When I say early stage, because it's pretty broad, like early stage, I would focus more on the pre-seed. There was really little happening in these years. You had some initiatives, but you had not that many accelerators, for example. In the past years, you've seen so many accelerators jumping into the field, and so much has changed. At the same time, I think it has changed for the best, because now you have a lot of different opportunities as a startup, like for funding, finding funding sources. But at the same time, as the ecosystem is maturing in Canada, and if we focus in Montreal, for instance, I think everyone is kind of moving up. And so when we say early stage now, there's still a gap, I think, to bridge, at really pre-seed level, and this is what we're trying to address at Front Row Ventures.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you mentioned this gap. I'm going to come back to your career because I think we glossed over your investment banking career. I'd love to dive into that piece. But to go back, because I'm curious about the point you mentioned about this gap. So maybe if you can unpack that a little bit. Like, how do you see this gap? Is it in funding? Is it in talent? So just curious.
I'd say all of the above, to be honest. So if we focus first on funding, I think that, as there are more and more startups, in the ecosystem right now, and more investors as a result, um, investors, per essence, have to deal with risk, but at the same time, as less risk they can take, as happier they are. And so I guess that's what I mean when I say that the ecosystem is moving up, and the financing chain is moving up. Is that, when you look at a lot of websites nowadays, early stage means more seed slash series A funding. It's really hard to find institutional investors who would jump in at pre-seed level. You have some, Real Ventures is a very good example of it. Panache Ventures is also a good example of it. But you don't have that many funding companies so early. This is where the accelerators, jump in and try and feed that gap. But I think that there's still a lot to be done to make sure that this company that we're financing at a later stage keep arriving, keep feeding the top of the funnel, because you can't really grow what you can't seed. So I think this is something that needs to be watched in the upcoming years.
I'm going to play devil's advocate just for a second, but I'm obviously I'm on your side of the argument, but just for a second. So, because the way I see it is that the tools to launch a startup, the ability to validate, get initial revenue, have dramatically decreased over time, right? So the argument that we need more funding at pre-seed for me is like, is that really the case, or should the entrepreneurs at that level just go out and prove, validate their model? It's relatively cheap to do so, and then show traction to be able to raise around. So curious to hear a little bit on that dynamic of the fact that it is easier, let's say, to be able to validate a model than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
You're definitely right on that. It has never been as easy to launch a startup as now, I'm 100% behind you on that, and we keep, when I was at Next AI, a couple of months ago, we kept telling the entrepreneurs, come up with an MVP, focus on the problem, come up with like a quick solution that you're bringing to this problem, test it, and then iterate, 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 iterate. So I agree with you that um, launching the startups and getting a bit traction has never been as easy as before. That being said, because the ecosystem is maturing, and because these startups, these very, very early stage startups, are now competing with more advanced startup, the investors sometimes tends to, like when you have to choose between a company which have like gone through like XYZ milestones, you'll always go for the more advanced company because like they've checked more boxes than earlier stage startups. So I'm just saying that we still need to be careful that we're here for the early stage startups, but I completely agree with you that these startups still needs to like prove their point and have some kind of traction. But I guess that even though I agree with that, I think that maybe I'm a bit biased because coming from like Next AI and Front Row Ventures, the companies that we're talking about are really, really heavily tech dependent, like, so, and from for some of them, because they're AI powered, they can be focused on, like, for example, biotech or med tech industries, and this takes a lot of time to develop. And so you still need some fuel to put into the company during this time.
Yeah, you brought a few good points, right? So, like, just on that last one, so like things that are like harder, like deep tech problems, it's not a social app. It's not like like, hey, let's whip this up. Like the dude that started Wordle, like that's not a weekend project. If you want to go and contribute to sectors like medicine, for instance, right, where it takes a lot of validation, it takes a lot of hurdles, and like there's also like the sales costs of meeting with regulators and stuff like that. So I understand that that's one constraint. And then to your previous point, I found it interesting as well, where everyone's ready to jump on the bandwagon. So you see these like really big growth funds, which I think is great. But like you said, those investments have largely been de-risked, right? Like we're having this conversation when today's startup announced a $100 million round.
Yeah,
Amazing,
ready
but
to run.
like it's been largely de-risked, right? So it's like it's not. There's this element of risk. So how do you, when you talk to LPs, because you mentioned your fundraising, how do you then present the risk profile? How do you get them interested into what you're doing at Front Row?
I think really our USP at Front Row is really that more than anyone else, we're most and foremost a talent investor. When you look at pre-seed and really early stage companies, you would really have to focus on the founders first, their grit, whether it makes sense for them to be entrepreneurs or not. And I guess, that at Front Row, focusing only on student founders, as um, allows us to have this kind of, I would say, rough diamonds, like people who are really passionate about solving a problem and who would put anything they have, and all the time and all the energy that they have to really focus on their company. So when I go out there and talk to the LPs, I think that our USP is really that we invest in talent first. And we invest in this talent in different ways. Of course, we're student led university focused fund. So we invest money and we invest capital into the student founders. But we don't only invest capital into the student founders, we also invest time and training and give mentorship to the other side of the equation, which are the students that we train to become the next tech generation, whether they're going to become VCs or tech operators or even founders as a second step in their career. So I think that LPs, when they look into Front Row, is they're interested in different things. First, we have like a proprietary deal flow. So the ability that we have to be on campuses, and we're present on 20 campuses in Quebec and Ontario for now, and Ontario for now. The ability to be, like on the ground in all these campuses and have access to these companies is pretty exceptional. We basically have interactions with 140,000 people a year. So just to give you an idea of like the sourcing engine that we are at Front Row Ventures. The second thing that these LPs are interested is also they're aware that like investing in Front Row Ventures is basically investing in the future of the tech ecosystem in Canada, and this is something pretty powerful for these people. And who these people are basically exited entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs, angel investors, who really want to, yes, have strong returns because this is what we're offering, but at the same time be part of something bigger, that only the economic returns. And I think also that when you think about it, and that would be the third point, is that when you invest in front row ventures, and due to the amount that we agree to take on from our LPs, you basically get the best of both worlds between being an angel investors and being an LP, because you can invest as little as 50K, for example, which is pretty much the amount that you would put as an angel investor, in one company only. And giving 50K, investing 50K into front row ventures will allow you to basically diversify your portfolio and not only invest in one company, but invest in 50 or 60 of them. And at the same time, still keep this very strong relationship, like close relationship as a mentor, as an advisor to these young founders who are craving to get, like feedback, advice from these very experienced people. So I guess this is really like the 3 points that LPs are interested when they look at front row ventures.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Like I also like the first one where it's like it's unique to you. It's like the deal flow and then being mission driven. On this last notion of diversification, how do you then think about portfolio construction? Is it a notion of like, well, we're so early, so it's really more a question of like shots on goal, many, many bets? So curious to hear how you think about how you build your portfolio.
So, well, as you just mentioned, Nectar, like this is like a pre-seed fund. So of course volume is important because like we're not making any exceptions to the statistics that everyone knows. Like one company out of 10 would be like the big winner. At the same time, I think that we're really cautious about what we're doing because we are aware that there's a lot of companies out there. Like just to give you an idea, in 2021 in Quebec and Ontario, we were able to screen 800 companies. So that's pretty big, and so we still need to make choices at the end of the day. So we're sector agnostic, so we wouldn't have like a tendency to invest, like at least consciously on like a particular sector. That being said, we see some trends in the portfolio, and I think that these trends are pretty reflective as well, of the fact that we invest in student founders. So I think that we're um, really trying to make the most of the money that we have and the money that we get from our LPs. So, as an example, like a bit of the trends that we have in our portfolio. So we have 60% of our portfolio that can be falling under the category of impact investing. So even if we're not an impact fund per se, we see that like I think it's a good a good thing to see that students, like are taking care of making this world a better place, like and trying to make it a better place. So these are the trends that we see. We also are making way better than the industry in terms of investing in women, for example. So 23% of our portfolio have women portfolio companies have women founders, which is just 10 times better than like the average, which is 2.3%. And I think also this is a good sign for the future of the tech ecosystem. Like more and more women are willing to take the plunge and found their startups. So I would say that at the end of the day, the way we select our portfolio is more a result of trends that we see, and we only try and pick the best ones through like following a very strict investment process that is basically based on like any other VC fund that you would know. But we don't like spray and pray, to answer your question. We do a bit more than
Sure.
that.
Was it a hard decision to take the role? Like, how did you think about it when you got the call, to be managing director at front row? Like, so because now it's been, I think, what, 5 months, 6 months that you're in.
A bit less, yeah. I just started end of September, so I'd say 4 months, or yeah,
Okay,
a
yeah.
bit
So,
more than 4 months.
I'm guessing it feels longer, but
I'm just
um,
over the 100 days, the famous 100 days that we mentioned, like where you're supposed to analyze everything and then take control and make decisions.
So yeah, like, so walk us through like like your why you took the role, your vision for front row, how it's changed now that you've had a little bit of time under your belt, even though not much.
Well, yeah, well, funny enough, so I had been working at Next AI for a bit more than 2 years when actually Raf, like reached out and said that he wanted to take a step back and that they would, like open the hunt to replace him, basically. Um, I was starting. I've been really, really happy and blessed to work at Next now. Like I was happy enough. I was lucky enough to be able to build the program from scratch. Like with the rest of the team, and so it felt like an entrepreneurial journey. Per se, because like we really were able to structure and build the program from scratch. But I think I arrived at a point where I wanted to have more impact first. So, like being able to really see more companies and not limited to, like only Montreal because I was working at Next AI Montreal, and also have more impact in the length if that works. Because at Next AI Montreal, we don't invest in the companies; it's non-dilutive funding. So at the end of the accelerator, yes, we do keep some relationship with like some of the founders, and I'm on the advisory board of some of the startups that I was supporting there. But still, like there's another cycle starting, new startups come in, and so it's all over again, kind of the same thing. And so I really wanted to jump on the investment side because I thought, okay, I really want to get more skin in the game, like and be able to help these companies grow and bring them to the next level. So that was like the origin of the idea. And then when Raf reached out, I'm not gonna lie to you, like I knew Front Row Ventures, like but I think I knew Front Row Ventures as anyone would know Front Row Ventures, having gone on the website once or twice and knowing that it's the student-led VC firm. But what I didn't know at that time was like really the real mission behind it, which is like really to train the next tech generation, and that like investing in these companies is part of the mission, but it's not like the end game. It's like to make sure that we train as many people as possible, and to make sure that it's like a real powerful training. We need to have them invest in real companies, basically. And when he started presenting this to me, I think, like it sounded even more appealing to me because I was at this time of my career and in my life where I had been an entrepreneur. I had worked in investment banking between my 20s and my 30s. And I think that this is like the decade when you need to prove to yourself, at least from my point of view, and to the others that you're capable. There's this expression in Quebecois, tu es capable. You just want to show the rest of the world and yourself that you're able to do things. And I think that when he reached out, I was in this time of my life, like also becoming a mother, that it's no longer about myself. It's more about empowering the other ones and having some impact on them. And I think that this is the reason why, like this position as the MD, training all this new generation, like we have 50 students, more than 50 students every year, like joining a new cohort that we need to train is pretty exciting challenge. And I think that if we do our job right, and so far so good, it's going to have a massive impact on the tech ecosystem, solving two problems at the same time. Like we do solve the pre-seed gap, as mentioned before, but we also the idea is also to feed this ecosystem with talent, and we both know that talent is definitely missing and lacking at the moment, and so we're trying to also address that. So hopefully, in a couple of years down the line, you will be able to see more and more alumni spreading into the ecosystem, and it has already started, to be honest.
Yeah. I think the other part too, it's obviously all fascinating, everything that you said, Manuel. Like I find it's very inspiring. I think the other point that for me I find that's interesting is also just showing that path for for a student that this is an option. And like back when I was studying, almost no one was talking about, hey, I want to start a company. It's more like what companies want to hire us, and it wasn't really part of the zeitgeist at the moment, in like the early 2000s of like, hey, starting a company is a thing. And like And today it's actually probably a better career path in terms of starting. And even if you fail, which you said the chances are high, probably A, you're going to learn much more. So like for your own personal development, and then B, you're going to be much more valuable on the market if you want to go get a job, versus starting in like, a lowly, analyst or coordinator position. Not that anything is wrong with that, but there is this avenue if like for the person that wants to start something, you are providing them that. So I think it's another part of the mission that I find personally appealing, because I didn't really get that, like that feeling that it existed when I was in school.
And I think also, to double click on what you just said, like I think what's amazing also about FRV, that opens like some new horizons for students who wouldn't have thought, like about such path um, before joining. I'm just taking an example. We see more and more PhD students, so like coming from like strong research background, like academic background, like strong academic background, who would like a couple of years ago would have focused on either like a career in research or a career in academy. And like some of them have joined FRV and have been like working on these deals and working with founders and also seeing VC from another like point of view. I think like not so far long ago, I think like for PhD students or for the academic world, VC was like kind of the, not the evil, but kind of like we are not supposed to make money out of research. It was like kind of the black box. And I think that through FRV, and we have a program, a particular program called Grad to VC, which is financed with the help of Fonds de Recherche du Québec. And we like open new horizons for these students who will potentially found a startup, will potentially join a VC firm, because we know that these scientists in residence are more and more appealing talents for these VC firms. But yeah, we'll have, I guess, a more open mind about what is it that they can do with their research, how they can leverage it, and how they can, in the future, think about another career path that wouldn't have been in their direction prior to join FRV.
Yeah. Maybe a few more final questions, Amanda. I think I probably like talk about this with you for hours. Um, you spoke a little bit about what's changing in early stage, and like how there are a lot of new trends and it's more dynamic. When you speak to entrepreneurs, what do you tell them what hasn't changed? Like, so when you think about like key pieces of advice, so like key principles that they should keep in mind. I'd be curious to like pick your wisdom as to like how do you approach, like when you're meeting with, an early stage company, the key principles that you think should be applied at that level.
I'd say first, and I'm sure you've already had heard that in the past, but I think this is the most important. And we were working really hard at Next AI to have, like tech people understand this basic concept that I think is basic to founders, and they need to really, like drink it every day, if I can say, is like fall in love with the problem. And too often we see founders, like convinced that they have a great solution, but not really focusing on the problem enough, and think about the customer. I think about what is the pain point that you're solving. And it seems again pretty basic, but make sure that your customer not only understands what you're doing, but like that it really solve a pain that he has expressed. um, so that would be my first, I think, thing that will never change because you need to fall in love with the problem. I think the second thing that we really look for, and maybe it's I'm not saying it's more important at pre-seed, because honestly, my knowledge is pretty much at pre-seed level, so I wouldn't dare saying how they take care of it at later stage. But when we invest in a company, and even more at pre-seed, we invest in the founders. So what we're trying to see in these founders are key qualities that we wouldn't compromise on. And again, like nothing new, but I think that founders that are mission driven, that are coachable. And what does coachable mean? It means that you need to be self-aware. Like when you receive an advice, when you receive a comment, you need to be able to digest it. It doesn't mean that the person who's giving you the advice is necessarily right. It just means that you need to acknowledge the comment and like act on it, whether you agree or disagree, but at least like you've taken the time to digest it. So yeah, self-aware, coachable, and founders who willing really were not gonna stop until they find a path, basically. And like being a former entrepreneur myself, I know it's really easy to say when you sit on this side of the table. I'm really well aware of that. Um, and but I think this is the key thing that doesn't change. And to go back to one of the point that you mentioned earlier, I think that investing on an idea, like on the PowerPoint or a Google Slides, whatever it is, doesn't really happen anymore. So I think that students, founders, whether they're students or not, should really focus on like what are the key milestones that I need to achieve to prove enough traction to my investors to make sure that I manage to get to the next step that's gonna sound interesting enough for these people to look at my venture.
Yeah, I think you've given so much. I love these principles, Emmanuel. Maybe as a final question, is like if people want to learn more about Front Row and the amazing work you guys are doing, what will be the best way to reach out?
So of course we have a website, so it's frontrow.vc. It's pretty complete, and we're in the middle of our recruitment right now. So if you're a student and curious about knowing more about VC, like please feel free to reply. And if people want to reach out to me directly, like I'm super reachable on LinkedIn, for example. So Emmanuelle Coppinger, I really try to answer as quickly as possible. So yeah, that would be like the best way to reach out to us, basically.
Amazing, amazing, Emmanuel. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Nectar.